In this video, we'll take a look at 5 trendy motion graphic gradient reveal techniques. We'll be taking a look at different ways to create gradient strokes, swirls, adding grain to the video, and stylizing your logo to match the scene. What's up everyone, hope you're doing well. My name is Swirls from Animation Deconstructed. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe and turn that bell notification on so you know when I release new videos. I've broken this video up into chapters so that you can skip ahead or come back at a later stage to re-watch something that interests you. Let's jump straight in. Inside After Effects, I have a new composition which is 1920 by 1080p, 30 frames per second and 11 seconds long, and press OK. Also just going to zoom up here so we can see about 4 seconds of our timeline. Right click, new, solid, and we're going to create some gradient background. I'm going to come over to the Effects and Presets panel. I'm going to type in gradient and we're going to drop the gradient ramp onto this. Holding shift, let's just drag this to the top left and to the bottom right, and we'll adjust the colors. Got a few written down here so you can follow along if you want. E400FF, and the second color is going to be 003CFF. What I'm going to do is also add a turbulent displace onto this, just to add some more randomness to this. I'm going to take the size up, let's take that all the way to 1000, go to frame 0, turn the evolution on, and I'm just going to go right to the end here and change that to 3 revolutions. And if we press U, you can just see our keyframes there, and I'm going to go to the beginning here, just drag through and see how this looks. Twirl everything up, Control D to duplicate, and we're just going to change some colors here. I want to change these just to sort of like pastel shades of the colors before. That should be good, and I'm going to drop this one below. Next thing I'm going to do is just zoom out slightly, and we're going to mask this. So hold down and make sure you've got the pen tool selected. I'm going to click here, let's do something sort of random, really come out on the sides here at the bottom, and then M 3 times so we can see the mask properties. I'm going to drag up on our feather. Let's take this pretty high, about 1000 should be good, and at 0 we're going to keyframe our mask. I'm going to move over and just go to 11 seconds and double click on the mask, rotate it and move it into place. Around here should be good. And then if we actually move through, you'll see that it doesn't rotate. So what we need to do is just copy the first keyframe, paste it, double click, rotate it 90 degrees and move it into place. And now if we move through here, we'll see that it actually rotates and pulses. I'm going to take these 2 layers, I'm going to pre-compose them and call them gradient 1. Move all attributes into, and in our project I'm just going to take that layer and I'm going to duplicate it up 3 times. I'm going to recolor number 2 and 3, just adding some different shades, and I'll see you back here in a few moments. So I've gone ahead and recolored gradients 2 and 3, and if you want to use the colors that I've used exactly, check the description. I've got them written out there in order, but just to take a look at the effects, got some pastel ones below and some darker ones above, and the same for this, it's just a lot pinker, but feel free to use any sort of colors that you want. Number 4, I want this to be completely complementary to gradient 1, so what I'm going to do is just create a new adjustment layer, come over to Effects and Presets, type in CC Color Offset, add that to adjust the red phase and the green phase, maybe -90, take this into the blues, and then just add some more green to this, so maybe about 60, and I'm happy with that. Once we've created our colors for our theme, we can go ahead and start creating the pulses which will animate over the background. In order to create our pulse, I'm going to right click, create a new solid. Let's choose a black layer, call this Pulse 1, press OK. Come over to the shape tools, hold down and make sure that you're selecting the ellipse tool. Holding Control and Shift, let's just click and drag to create a circle. And then holding down on the pen tool, I'm going to choose my mask feather tool. I'm going to drag this in. Let's just create something a bit more interesting. I'm going to click here and drag to the edge so that we've got a soft side and a hard edge. Then I'm going to press S for the scale, turn on my scale. So I've just zoomed into my timeline, and let's move this over to about 24-25, around about here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. And then at 0, let's take this down to 0%. Let's move over to this keyframe and just oversize this so it scales over the whole image. And I'm going to add the rotation by Shift R and turn that on. And about here, I want it to be -1, so it's actually rotating to the left. I'm happy with that. Let's duplicate the background. I'm going to track matte, and I'm also going to press R for rotation and rotate this 180 degrees. Now we should have something like this. I also want this to fade out after this is taken over the screen so that we can get back to our original background. I'm going to create a new mask. Let's do something like this. Press M 3 times, take the feather up. I want it really soft, so maybe 350 would be good. Also want to invert this so it's doing the opposite. And then just the expansion, let's start that right about here. So mark at about 20 frames. Let's move over to 1.5 seconds and take this right up. Go back here and just take this right down until we can't see it. Now if we play through this, pretty happy with that. Select both keyframes and F9 to easy ease. Moving ahead, let's create another pulse, and the way I want to do this is actually using shape layers. I'm going to double click to create a circle, press U twice, hold Alt and double click on the constraint proportions on the size. It'll create a circle. Let's also make this a bit smaller. I don't want any fill on this. I do want a stroke. And 100 pixels should be perfect for that stroke. Start this at 0. I'm going to turn the scale on. Move over to about, let's say about 125. Add a keyframe. I'm going to take this one down to 0. Turn the keyframe on for the stroke width, and let's see how this looks. Pretty happy with that. Let's go over to the end here and take that down to 0. And I'm going to select all these keyframes, press F9, go to the graph editor. Make sure that you're in the speed graph. Select all these keyframes. Let's just pull this slightly and then pull this one quite a lot so it slows down at the end. Control Shift C, call this Pulse 2, so we're pre-composing. Move all attributes into new composition. Close our graph editor. Go into this. We'll have to close our graph editor as well there. And then you can see this happening. To make this a bit easier to work with, Control K to bring up your composition settings, and we're going to change this to 2 seconds long. And I want to create another pulse with inside this that is going to be smaller with like a glass edge to it. So I'm going to select my ellipse tool, double click, create a new circle, U twice, and Alt double click on the constraint proportions. Let's make this about 600 by 600. I want a fill, but I don't want a stroke with this one. And then I'm going to move to about, let's say we start this at about 8 frames. I'm going to move this over, add a keyframe for size, and we're going to move over, let's say about 125, add a keyframe there. Then I can take this down to 0. See if this is moving. Yep. Okay, in order to create that soft inner, I'm going to duplicate this, just solo this so you can see what's happening. Add a Gaussian blur and take this right up, and let's take this to about 100. Then what we can do is actually alpha invert matte this. You can already see the look that we're going for, but I want to just tighten those edges in, so press U on the top shape to get your keyframes. Let's move this off. Let's say about 25, 24. Let's actually bring this in. I wanted to end a bit earlier, so I'm going to take this right up. So something like this. Going to select all the keyframes, press F9 and do a similar kind of adjustment on the keyframes. Slightly forward and pull these back a bit more. Close the graph editor and let's take a look at this. You can close this, go back to your main composition, and what we're going to do is duplicate this gradient layer here. Let's press M and get rid of the mask which is on there, and I'm going to hide this top layer. It's already alpha matting the top layer, so we should start seeing a nice pulse inside there. Also just want to bring up the rotation. It's at 180 right now, so I'm going to turn that on at 0, and I'm going to move over to right at the end here and change this to 1 and 0. So this is rotating and giving us a bit more movement. Now you'll see this breaks our actual circle because it's getting clipped over there, but we can easily fix this by adding a CC repeat tile or reptile. Double click that, change the repeat to unfold, and then drag on the down and drag on the up, and you'll see it actually fixes those holes. One more preview just to see the pulse. Next, we can start creating the soft gradient swirls which are happening over the scene, and this technique that I'm using is pretty unique. So let's create a new solid, black, and we're going to call this strokes 1. Press OK, and I'm going to create a new mask on here. Select the ellipse tool, Control Shift, constraint proportions, and let's draw something almost as big as the height of the composition. I'm going to select my feather tool. I'm going to do the same sort of thing that I did before, just to follow a pattern in this animation. I'm going to move this over to about 1 second, so I want these to start after these pulses and some of these swirls to start happening here. I'm going to solo the background and just solo this layer so that we're working with this for now. First thing I want to do is add a linear wipe to this. So transition, linear wipe, double click that, and let's just change this completion, say about 50%. I'm going to take the feather far up, let's say about 300. Looks good. And just change the angle of this, something like that. Next, I want to add a transform to this. So transform. Let's drop that below. Let's actually make this, take that to about 0. What I want to do is actually move this position. So select this button right here. Otherwise, we might move the anchor points. And when we move left and right, it won't be the position. So select the position by pressing over there. And we're going to move this to the right, about over here. I'm going to turn on the keyframe for the position, press U so that we can see it. And I want this animation to play out over, let's say, about 2 seconds. So move over to 3 seconds, move this back into the center almost. So around here. Control-Shift-D just to cut the layer and delete so that we've only got this area here. Now we can work a bit neater. I'm now going to just keyframe my linear wipe. So let's turn the keyframe on for the linear wipe, press U so that we can see the keyframes. Go over to 2 seconds, drag this keyframe over actually, and then go back to 1 second, take this up to 100, and then move over to 3 seconds and take this up to 100. Let's just drag this so we can see it. Okay, that's good. Now we want to add some rotation and turn that on, press U and U again so that we can see this. I'm just going to drag this back so that we can see where we're rotating from. So I'm going to take this to about 90 degrees, around about there. And then move over to the end and let's rotate this backwards quite a bit. So holding Shift, make this -2. It just rotates around and let's see what this looks like. That looks pretty good, but we just want to deform this a bit more, and I'm going to use CC Power Pin. This way we can actually control everything from the left and right when we duplicate this up. So what I want to do is let's just bring these in so we're following the circle about there, and I'm going to do the same here, holding Shift around about there, and then I'm going to almost create like a triangle in the middle here, just something like that, and this should distort this slightly. So now that we've got that there, I just want to move this transform over slightly more, and that's looking a lot better to me. I want to use one of our other gradients, so let's choose this pink one, gradient 3, drag this below the strokes, and I'm going to choose alpha matte. Let's just move this over so it matches at 1 second. Let's see, yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Going to cut this, Control-Shift-D, and now just recolor these two layers so that they're the same. Choose a green, and then I'm going to duplicate this up, and I'm going to adjust a few things with the strokes. So let's move forward just to see what we're doing. Press U. Going to change this transition completion to 0, that we're getting a full ball. I'm also going to go over here, transform. Let's change the scale of this to about 80%. This will give us almost like a ball on the end of our transition. We just have to play with the rotation. Let me just take this down so that we can see what's happening. Just playing with the transition completion, and then I'm going to change the rotation to about 180, I think. Just want this to end a bit sooner, so let's move this back to about 215 and see how that looks. Take this down to 100 as well. I just want to change one more thing. Let's select our gradient and change this to overlay and just press play. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that, and we're going to create 2 on the other side. So let's select all these layers, Control-D to duplicate. Let's drag them above and move these over to, say, 120. And I'm just going to hide these 2 layers. I'm going to hide that top one so that we're just working with this layer here. Moving forward, I want to have more of a stroke to this, so I'm going to select the layer that we're actually working with. Press the M key so we see our mask. Duplicate the mask, double click, and let's drag this in about there, and then drag it in, and I'm going to create that. Change this mask to be subtract, and you should see this kind of nice rounded edge happening now. I want these to come in from the other side, so I'm going to select the power pin, and let's just swap this around, move that up, move that down, and then do a similar thing over here. It should be okay. Next thing I want to do is press the transform, and we're going to press U to get our keyframes. Move over here, and I want my transform to start over here. Start it on the circle. I'm going to copy and paste that, and then just move into the middle here somewhere. Just move this out. I just want to adjust this so that this actually goes around this way. So I'm going to change the rotation of this. If you want to see what's going on, just change your transition completion so you can see it a bit more clearly. Let's drag around here. So I'm going to make this -145. And let's just drag this back a little so I can see what's happening. And then I'm going to make my end here. Let's actually go into the positive on this side too. And let's just see if this is rotating the right way. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Take this back up to 100, the transition completion. Same at the end here. And we can actually make this about 30%. Something I want to do is just move this transform to about here. So it seems like it's going off, then coming back in. And then maybe change our angle of our wipe a bit more to the bottom right to see how this looks. So all these things can affect the way that these lines are created. So your wipe angle and your rotation of your transform. Now for the top one, let's just turn that on and we can copy a few of these attributes. Let's copy the power pin. Let's also copy our position keyframes. Press U, come over and then paste onto the position. And then our rotation. Let's copy this, paste our rotation. Let's also change our angle. Let's move over here. See how this is coming on. Need to just change this rotation to about there. Let's take the scale back up to 100. Just see how this looks. Let's unsolo everything. I'm going to select all these layers and let's just easy ease all these keyframes. Pressing F9 and give this one preview. Okay, I want just one more, so I'm going to select this bottom again, duplicate, take this to the top, and I'm going to move this over to around 215, 2.5 seconds. I'm going to do a few things here. Let's get rid of the power pin. I just want this to be like a half circle over here where we're missing some information. So let's actually turn off the position keyframes and we just want this to be static. And move into the middle here. Let's just make this 1 second long. So press U, select all these keyframes, hold Alt and just drag in. And then we can just bring these in again. So you can see where this is happening over here. What I'm going to do is just select this mask, press M, duplicate, and I'm going to make this really tight, holding Control and Shift to about there. And just drag this in. About there should be good. And change this to subtract. We should get something like this. Let's just move this even further down to around here. Let's also change the gradient 3 to this blue one over here. That should be good. Just to add some more interest is just select this gradient and this gradient here. Press R and let's rotate this 180. This over here is just rotating way too fast, so I'm going to open this up. Starting on 90, let's take this to 0. So I've just adjusted the rotation so that it comes in and does this kind of highlight across there. If you're finding this tutorial helpful, make sure to click that like button. This is a great place to work off of. And now I'm going to create the gradient strokes moving throughout the scene, and it's going to follow an infinity kind of symbol pattern. Create a new composition. Let's make this 2 seconds long, and I'm going to say infinity loop. Press OK, and I'm going to zoom out slightly, and we're going to use the pen tool to do this. I'm going to start up here, and we're going to create a really rough drawing of our figure 8. Something like this. Then just adjust these points so that your center is right about in the middle here. The whole idea here is that I want my stroke to actually go on the outside here and leave the scene and then come back in. And you don't need to make these rounded at all. We'll actually add an effect to do that. I'm going to change this to stroke. I'm going to take off the fill. Let's change the stroke to 266, so this is pretty thick, and I think that's the thickest we'll have it. I'm going to press U twice, and then just pull up the stroke and drop it back down so that we can change the line cap. I want this to be round capped, and then I want to add a trim paths to this. Drop that down, and we're going to drag this right up. About 98% should be good. Now what I can do is just offset this so we can see, and we're going to be going this way here. So I think that's a pretty good place to start. I'm going to switch this around so we're rotating forwards. I'm going to go to about 25. I'm going to turn this on at 0 and let's move forward to about 110, and I'm going to rotate this, let's say all the way around here, and then once it comes back somewhere around here. Next thing I want to do is actually go to the add, and we're going to add a round corners, and we're going to drop this down and just drag this right up. Initially we'll see that it doesn't actually affect anything, so what we need to do is drag this above our trim paths and it'll start affecting. About 1000 should be perfect. Let's go in here and just see how everything's going. Okay, now we just need to actually adjust our offset. I want this to come about here because the next thing I want to do is actually draw a circle, so this actually does a circle over there. Before we do that, let's just actually control the size of this and the stroke width of this. So I'm going to come over here and turn on the stroke width. Press U twice so that we see everything. I'm also going to turn on the start so that we can make this longer and shorter. It looks like it's motion blurring. Press U so we see our keyframes, so that will be twice. And then I'm going to move forward. So let's say about 15 frames, and I'm going to keyframe the stroke width and the start. Let's take this back to about 93, something like this. And I'm also going to come back here and just take the stroke width down to 0. You can see what we're trying to achieve here. So this is passing. I want this to go over the logo at some stage and reveal the logo. So at about 24, I'm going to take this a lot larger. So 320 should be good. And then move forward. I'm actually going to move this over to here and then move this over to here. Just see how this looks. Okay, and then back down to 98 over here and 266. I'm just going to copy this and paste the keyframe, and let's give this a preview. Let's just cut this down, and I'm going to create a circle. So select our circle, make sure you don't have the layer selected, and then I'm going to draw this. Let's go to the add, trim paths. Let's trim this down to 98. Let's also drop down the stroke and change this to round cap. Then we just have to offset this to around here, and also just change the angle of this point here, kind of match up. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm just going to cut that right over there and then pull this over, and we should see something like that. Let's turn on the offset keyframes and let's move over to 2 seconds. I'm going to drag around, and I want this to kind of end in the middle here again. So 1 and 94, and then let's just also keyframe the stroke width at about 1 second 20 frames. Take this down to 0. Might just move this out slightly, say around here. What we can do is actually just take this back as well, 95, to have it a bit thicker. Swirl everything up and give this one preview. Let's now drag this into a new composition, and I'm going to call this Infinity A. Let's move forward. I want to add a few effects to this so that we can get a softer kind of line, which will work with our gradients. So I'm going to come over here, type in echo. And if you haven't seen my gradient motion blur tutorial yet, make sure to check out that link. I'll leave it in the description. It uses echo as well. It's only 3 minutes long. But it is a really unique technique. Let's just change a few things here. I'm going to say 0. Stay in the negatives here so that the negatives mean that the motion blur will go to the back. So negative 0.010, and then I'm going to decay this about 0.75. Let's add a whole bunch of these so we make this longer. Let's say 18 copies, and then I'm going to add a Gaussian blur and just drag this up. Now I just want to create the hard edge on this Gaussian blur again, so duplicate this, delete, and let's just adjust a few things. I don't want any decay on this, and let's just take that up to 1, and then just take up our copies so that it just fills up this area. I'm going to take it up to about 50. And then I'm going to adjust the echo time, which will bring these in again. So let's say about 0.5, so half of that. That should be good enough. I'm going to select the bottom layer, and I'm going to track matte, alpha matte, and we should get a lot softer stroke. Okay, now that we're done with that, go back to the project. We're going to duplicate this, rename this to Infinity B. And this will be really quick. We're going to move forward until this goes off the screen. And at about this point here, we're going to cut these 2 layers, Control-Shift-D, and just swap them around, just so that we have something a bit different. Next thing I want to do is right-click, New, create a null object, select all these layers, parent it to the null, right-click on the null, transform, and we're going to flip horizontal. Now we should have a totally opposite animation to the other one. Back in the main comp, let's start these at about 1.5 seconds. I'm going to drop A and B right to the top. Just move these over, and I want 4 copies. Let's actually just alternate these with each other, and I'm going to work with the first one. We haven't used the gradient too much, so let's drag this in, drop it right about there. Also just going to Control-Shift-D to cut it so we keep our timeline neat, and drop this below B, and then duplicate this 3 times. Drag that above there, and I'm going to unsolo those. So I'm going to use the alpha matte on this. Let's show our background so we can see these. Don't actually like the the hard edge too much on this, but what I'm going to do is actually add a Gaussian blur onto the infinity layer. So double click there, just drag up slightly, something like that, and let's press S and let's make this minus 100 so that we're actually just flipping this whole image. Let's show the one above and change this to alpha matte. Just to change a few things, I'm going to press scale and say minus 100. And let's see how this looks. It's looking pretty good. Let's do the same here. Alpha matte, change this to overlay, and I'm going to do the same to the top here. So turn this on, alpha matte, scale. Let's make this minus 100 and change that to overlay. Let's just play this through. Select all and turn off the solo button. Just make sure that you select the gradient, the first one that we did, infinity, and copy that Gaussian blur to all the layers so that we soften this. And then I'm just going to preview one more time. Let's wrap this up with a quick but effective logo styling technique and then add the animated grain over the whole scene. Okay, so I've got a logo composition here, same size as the other one, just 5 seconds long, and I've just got a circular logo. I want to create a soft glowing kind of look on this logo so that it fades in nicely and goes with the rest of the animation. Where I'm going to do that is, let's just bring in our gradient 4, which we haven't used yet. I'm going to add a motion tile to this, so motion tile. I'm going to change the tile width to 50 and then just mirror the edges here. Let's also bring this in so that we're using a bit more of another layer. I'm going to come over here and change where the center is. Around here should be good. Turn on the tile center, move over to 5 and just tile this off into the purple. Let's just duplicate this logo, and then what I want to do is just track map this. If we hide that logo, you can see that we've got this happening here. With this selected, I want to create the soft light sweeps on top of the logo. So I'm going to select Vegas, and this will drive this effect. I'm going to take the segments down to 1, change the blend mode to transparent. So to just change the color of this to white. And then I'm just going to test this quickly, the rotation. Change the length to 0.5. Let's move over to 3 seconds and just keyframe that length. Move to the beginning and let's take that down to 0. And then I want to turn on the rotation, drawing on quite nicely. Move over to about 5. Right to the end there. Let's rotate this around. I think 1 and 180 should be perfect. I'm going to add a Gaussian blur. Drag up on the 70. Let's add a set matte to this that we're just cropping inside here. Just want this really to glow a bit more. So I'm going to adjust the Vegas. Let's come over to the width, drag this up. Let's say about 17. I want the start opacity to be 0 and the midpoint to be 1. And let's see how this draws on. It's looking a lot better. I'm going to duplicate this gradient and it should automatically alpha matte on that. Just turn that off. And I'm going to change this layer to additive and solo it. If this isn't bright enough, let's just also add a CC composite. This way we can duplicate this layer on top of it and just set it to add. To sell this effect, let's create a new adjustment layer and we're going to add a camera lens blur and change the blur radius, say 20. And change that to additive and just change the opacity of this to about 50. That's looking a lot better. Just take a preview of this. I just want to add some text to this, so I'm going to right click new text, drop this below our logo right over here. I'm going to duplicate our gradient and alpha matting that, and we're just going to fade this in. I'm going to keep this pretty simple. This tutorial is already very long, so at about 1 second I'm going to take that to 0. I'm going to move over to 2 seconds and I'm going to fade this in. Just select both keyframes and F9. Close this down, move back to our main composition, and I'm going to find a place where let's bring in the logo right about here. Take my logo and just drop it right at the bottom and move this into place. Press the T key, opacity, let's turn this down to 0. Let's move forward 20 frames. Let's drag that up. Select both keyframes, F9, and just need to add the grain to this whole thing. And what we do is layer new adjustment layer, and we're going to come over to effects and presets. We're going to add some vibrance just to pump this up. Let's take this to about 30 and 25, and then just add some HLS. And I want to use this noise HLS auto. This way we don't have to actually animate the noise throughout our animation. Going to change the uniform to grain, change the lightness to 2, and already you can see the grain happening here. And let's just do a final preview for this. If you're interested in seeing more videos like this, take a look at either of the videos pitching up on the screen above me right now. Keep animating, and until next time.